You'll notice, for those of you who this is maybe your first time joining us, that we are the Vixens, but we look a little different than we normally do. And we packed up our accents and put them away for the night. So we are here to provide for you and to talk with a wonderful, wonderful artist tonight. Vixens UnLearning is just an opportunity for us to come together and learn from others. So I'll hand it over to Lisa Athena, and welcome everyone.
Hi, welcome. So excited to have everybody here, especially our incredible guest, Calundra Smith, who is a theater critic. So a very different type of artist than we've had on the series thus far, but a fascinating and extremely accomplished individual. And we're very excited to welcome her here tonight. Calundra, come on down.
Hello.
Hi.
I successfully clicked.
You're mastering the technology. Woohoo! It's shockingly difficult to push that button sometimes.
Unmute and turn your camera on at the same time is like, it's pressure.
And there's a moment where you're like, no, it looks on my screen like I am unmuted, but no one can hear me.
I go, which one should I do first? Should I unmute first or should I take the camera off first? And that's why I'm usually late.
the mild panic. It's true. Well, we're super excited to have you, Calundra. Calundra is a theater critic and arts journalist whose mission is to connect people to cultural experiences and each other. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Oxford American, Food and Wine, which I have to say is sort of like a standout on this list. It's like one of these things is not like the others, but I'm very excited about it. The American Theater Magazine, TDF Stages, and other places as well. She's a member of the American Theater Critics Association. She's on the executive committee and is co-chair of the EDI committee. Diversity and equity, diversity and inclusivity. Amazing. I was like, equality, equity, which one is it? It's always one of those. And teaches workshops about addressing cultural identity in cultural criticism at theaters and universities across the country, which is super, super cool.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you all this evening.
We are super excited to have you. So we occupy a theater space that's probably pretty different from what you normally engage with. Not only do we, generally speaking, not perform in a traditional, like, buy a ticket, sit down in the dark theater, but we are, I don't know how much you can hear.
The puppy's adorable. I'm here for it.
The Athena household, but she's just super excited that we're having this conversation tonight as well. So our work just occupies like an interesting space between very, very rehearsed, but also lots of improv, all kinds of different things. There were audience participation and volunteers who are told it's time to come on stage. It's a very specific type of theater, generally performed at Renaissance fairs. So our world doesn't often interact or overlap with yours. So I think everyone here is really interested to hear about the critic side of things, because our loudest critics are usually just drunk people in the back. So can you talk to us about like the critic world and your path to becoming a critic?
Sure. So I've been doing theater criticism for almost 10 years now. I got my start actually in upstate New York. So when I was an undergraduate, I went to the University of Georgia and I majored in theater and journalism. And I studied abroad in London the summer before my senior year of college. And we had to take a performance critique course. And I had been wondering for a while in college how I was going to mix like my interest in the performing arts and my interest in journalism. And that performance critique course was kind of like the light switch that went off. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect thing. So I literally went to Google and was like, what are the arts journalism master's degree programs in America? And there were only like four at the time. And so I applied to all of them and ended up going to Syracuse University. So I got my master's degree in arts journalism at Syracuse. And it was while I was in graduate school that I really got a chance to test out, being a critic. And that really came with freelancing for Broadway World. Broadway World has what they call like kind of regional contributors, where you basically write for free in exchange for exposure. And so I wrote for Broadway World Central.
Classic work for exposure. Yes.
Right, exactly. So I wrote for Broadway World Central New York, and I went around to like Ithaca and Rochester and Syracuse and different places and just started reviewing shows. And so that's how I got started. And then when I moved back to Atlanta, which is where I'm currently based, I got hooked up with a publication called Arts ATL, which they're an online magazine that was founded by the arts critics at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The AJC laid off all of their arts critics after the recession in 2008. And so those same arts critics went and started their own site called Arts ATL, which continues to this day. It's the only comprehensive arts coverage website for Metro Atlanta. So that's how I really got my start in criticism, is just kind of saying to people like, hey, I'm really into this and I want to write. For me, writing came before theater. If you ask my mother, I've been writing, since I was 3, namely on the walls in her house. But that's how that first started, is, that kind of path from college into grad school and saying, this is cool. I want to do this.
Amazing. Were you performing at all beforehand, or were you playwriting in that world?
So I always say theater is where they put the kids who talk too much in class. And so I was a bit of a chatty Cathy. And so, I feel like with all things, like in school, it starts with like, President's Day program and like the Black History Month program and like Flag Day program, all those different programs you did in elementary school. That was probably what planted the seeds of it. And then, of course, because I'm Southern, the children's choir is like your rite of passage. And so I hated being in the children's choir. Let me just say, I was terrified. I had such nerves and I was so shy as a little kid, and they used to bribe me with butterscotch candy.
That would work.
Which is like the most Southern church thing that could possibly happen.
The choir director with a bag full of Werthers, like, here you go.
Yes. I love Werther's Original. I have no shame. But so that was kind of, I think, what was the beginning seeds of it. And then when I got into high school, I like kind of started taking theater more seriously. And I did, all the drama club and thespian conference and, one act play competition and all that theater nerd stuff. I was like the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, and I was Regan in King Lear. And it's so funny because in high school, I feel like I always like had to play these kind of drama villain roles. And then when I get to college, I play nothing but comedy. So it's interesting how people see you at different, phases of your life and how you present yourself at different phases of your life. And now that I write criticism and do some playwriting myself, I do a dramedy is kind of where I live. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. I love when all the threads of your life sort of converge and take you to like the place that's like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not sure how here became where I'm supposed to be, but this is clearly where I'm supposed to be.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. So we don't do a ton of drama. That we try to sprinkle in moments here and there, but generally the crowds at the Renaissance Fair want like 20 to 30 minutes of utter hilarity, stabby, 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 huzzah, I walk away.
And that's what they come for. You have your turkey leg and your pint, and you've got your fairy wings, and that's what you come for.
Exactly. And you got to give the people what they came for.
Exactly.
What we're here to do. But our shows, like I said, are really sort of a hybrid of classic material, primarily Shakespeare. I think, in fact, only Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
It's like sort of our guy, but also new material. And while I think it's fairly rare for those two things to interact, I was wondering if you could talk about how you would approach reviewing or engaging with a like traditional Shakespeare play, whether it's, everybody in ruffs and doubloons, which pretty much no one produces anymore anyway, versus like a new play and new material.
Gotcha. Well, I will say, I think that, I think it depends. Every theater critic has a different idea of, what drives them to do the work. So for me, I think the role of the theater critic is to kind of be a bridge builder between the audience and the art form. I think, theater critics do a lot of things. We're historical documentarians of the work because theater is inherently ephemeral, as you all know. I think that we are elevating the taste of the audience. We're letting people know that something exists, right? We're giving, that kind of typical thumbs up, thumbs down review. But to me, it's less thumbs up, thumbs down, and more of kind of a conversation starter. So everybody has different views of, what the critic does. And for me, I do approach new work versus classics very differently. I think that for me, the main difference is that when I'm writing about classics, I'm not necessarily dissecting the language as much. I don't know that I'm necessarily need to spend my, 500 words talking about whether Shakespeare was a good writer or not, or whether, A Midsummer Night's Dream works as a script. I think that...
Fair question. That is a fair question.
I think that, it's more so about whether the performance I'm seeing of this classic work is aligned with the audience expectations and intention of this work, or are they giving me something from this work that was unexpected? It's always fun to see a Shakespearean play done where it's done in a way where you get something from it that you haven't gotten after you've seen it a ton of times. I mean, anybody who's a theater critic knows that like they're going to Twelfth Night, Midsummer, Romeo and Juliet, Scottish play, Hamlet you to death, and you're going to see them a million times. And so it's like seeing, A Christmas Carol every Christmas, which I see my first one of the season tomorrow. And so, when you can see a classic work and somebody make it feel fresh, that's always nice. And when it's fresh and not gimmicky. Like I saw a production of, I think it might have been 12th Night at Cal Shakes. And, it was like a steampunk kind of interpretation. And it was beautifully done, but like the costuming was really weird. And the set design was really weird. And so, sometimes the gimmickiness gets a little odd, it's like too much. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it's like, really, really works. Like I saw a production of Midsummer that was set in like space, and that worked really well. Where like a lot of the characters were like stars or planets or, constellations or whatever. They kind of did it like that. And that was really cool. So, I mean, I think it just depends on, how they find that balance to where when I'm writing about new work, not to be long-winded, when I'm writing about new work, I am looking a lot at like language. Does this work as a play? Does it work on stage? Are there strong enough objectives and tactics, for people to play and that sort of thing. So it is a different approach in that way.
Interesting. I loved what you were saying about the role of a theater critic being to start a conversation and less to be about like, this is the be all end all opinion on this. I have the last word and nothing more shall be said. Given that it's a very like front facing medium, like here's my thoughts on this. You're welcome to have them. How do you see that conversation growing? How do you see that conversation moving from the stage to the critic to people, and then so that it's a conversation, any kind of back again? Or is it more about conversation starting between the viewers? What is the like feedback loop kind of like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that a lot of the time when we write, we are kind of giving the audience member and the artist something to chew on. They very rarely come back to us unless they're mad.
Yeah.
And that is, that's an interesting challenge. I mean, I've never in the, almost 10 years that I've been doing this, I've never changed a review before at the request of an artistic director or an artist, even though I've been asked to. I look back on reviews I wrote when I was in my early 20s and I can say, okay, like I could have written that better, but my opinion on this thing hasn't changed. So I think that what is happening most of the time is that audience members are discussing with each other, whether or not they agree with the critic or something that the critic brought up in the review that has made them, want to dig deeper. It's not so common that people come back to the critic unless they're mad. And that does happen. I have had people slide in my DMs on Facebook and on Instagram and tell me how they feel. I've had artistic directors who've gotten my cell phone number, text message me essays about why I'm wrong. And that, that's just, it happens. It changes nothing, but it does happen. And I think that in the beginning, well, even still now, because theater criticism is a very white, middle-aged field, I think
theater is a white, middle-aged field.
Well, yeah. But I mean, theater criticism, oh my God.
But yeah.
So, I think that there's sometimes challenges that people have of respecting your authority when you're a woman. And I mean, I'm coming in a woman, Black, under the age of 80, I'm just kidding to everybody watching. I'm not ageist. But, just that it presents a trifecta of challenges sometimes with people respecting your authority, but volume, I let my work speak for me, and so over the years, I've been able to get some respect.
I'm glad you are very deserving of respect. And even if an artistic director doesn't agree with your opinion, it's still valid. It's valid. You're allowed to have it. And it's just one person's perspective on the show. Everybody calm down.
Right. Exactly. The critic is still just one person. Of course, the dynamic is different in places like New York, where you have, the Times can determine whether a show flies or falls. And that's a dynamic that is really, to me, as much on the artists and the producers as it is on the critic. I think that I've seen it with my own eyes, there's a different sort of reverence that people have for the New York Times, and rightfully so. I mean, they are the newspaper of record, right? And I don't have anything bad to say about the Times. I've written for the New York Times and I've had a great editorial experience in the arts and culture section. I cannot speak to politics, so nobody email me about that because I don't write political articles. But I can say that I think that the weight that artists and producers put on a New York Times review is just as harmful as a review that may not be just to the art. Does that make sense?
Can you say more about what you mean by just to the art?
Meaning, say, a review of a show goes up where it's clear that like the critic was completely disconnected from the material or didn't understand it, or, didn't have the cultural literacy, so to speak, or awareness to be able to engage with the show properly. Like we think about shows like Head Over Heels, where, Peppermint was misgendered in reviews. We think about shows like Venus by Susan Laurie Parks, where, there was a complete lack of knowledge on the part of the critic that, she was playing with the idea of hot not Venus and that historical trope. Or, things like that, where the critic has written a review where there's a complete disconnect, where they don't understand the material. And then the show gets yanked after, previews because people are like, oh, the Times said this. And it's like, well, sometimes the person sent to review it wasn't equipped to review it. And that's the harm of putting a lot of weight on one person's voice.
Oh, no, please continue.
No, I was just going to say, and that's why I like the idea of a review as a conversation starter as opposed to a final word. And I will tell you that it's also always fun to have playwrights approach you because playwrights are intense.
It's their baby.
It is their baby. And I think to myself, oh my God, I'm going to be that person soon.
That's true, because you've been doing playwriting and producing. I want to come back to some of the things that, I want to stay on this topic and then we'll jump to some of that, just because I think what we're talking about now is so interesting. I know that I've been seeing a lot of that same conversation in my theatrical, social, and professional circles around like who gets to review something, or who gets to have an opinion on it, and that idea that just because it's your top person at the publication does not mean that they are, like you said, the right person. They're not equipped to fully engage with the work. And I know that was one of the topics of conversation that led to and then became a part of the We See You White American Theater movement that was so phenomenal. Over the summer, it was sort of codified because it is a conversation that has been going on for many, many years, and it is a movement that is going to be continuing moving forward. For our viewers who aren't familiar with this, a really impressive number of theater artists of color, everyone from actors to playwrights to dramaturgs, designers across various fields, artistic directors, all came together in a conversation that I am fascinated to know how, like, I want to be on that Zoom call and see all the people in that room, but came together and said, we're going to take this moment where theater is on pause and because of the pandemic, but part of an ongoing conversation, but to say, let us take this time to reevaluate how theater is being produced in this country and what are our values and what are we paying attention to and where are we opening doors, where have we been closing doors, and rather than the idea of like make a seat at the table for people for this particular show, making sure that like there's just many tables in the room that everyone can come and sit at. And one aspect of that was around ensuring that plays are reviewed by people who are equipped to engage with the material at bare minimum, who have done the legwork and the research to say, oh, Susan Laurie Parks has written a play about the Hottentot Venus. I should probably know what that is. And at best, sending people who have some sort of connection with the material, who can really speak to those cultural aspects. So I was just wondering, we were really inspired and called in by that movement and the demands that they've released. And while our work, as I've previously said, is pretty different from the majority of the organizations that was really speaking to in that moment, we are in those industries, and our fields are largely white. The people on this call are largely white or white passing. So it's something that we're very aware of and clocking in on. And I was just wondering, I know theater isn't really back yet and may not be for a while, but between pandemic theater and places that are trying to produce still and finding ways to do so, have you seen any impact on your role in theater from that movement yet? And if not, what are your hopes for that role and that movement as theater eventually comes back to us?
Yeah, so I think, we see white American theater shook a lot of people. And I think that it shook a lot of people in a good way. I think that a lot of conversations that were being had, water cooler conversations, so to speak, have now been put on Front Street. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that we do need theaters programming to start reflecting the communities that they're in. And largely, if you look at some of the highest funded, largest, most prestigious, so to speak, regional theaters and New York theaters, their programming does not reflect the demographics of their community. And I think that that's really, really important. And then there's the other layer of, we see you, in addition to talking about programming and leadership hires and all of those things, of talking about just personal responsibility to be able to create inclusive environments. As far as the criticism piece is concerned, it's been a few months since I read kind of the demands for critics from WeCU. I remember reading them and thinking, to be blunt, that they were written by people who don't understand how theater criticism works and don't really have any knowledge of the field. But I don't necessarily think that's the artist's fault. I think when it comes to journalism in general, people who are not in it don't get it, because we're not very transparent as transparent as we could be about how it works, right? So what people should know is that if we look across this beautiful country of ours of 350 million people, only 4 cities in this country have a staff theater critic of color. Less than 10 of them have a woman as their full-time staff critic. So even when we look in New York, there are a lot of women critics, but when we talk about full-time, full benefits eligible staff positions where they're getting retirement benefits, there aren't a lot of positions left at daily newspapers or at lifestyle magazines. And B, most of the positions that are left are occupied by white men. So that should just be understood. Then when we look across the field at who the regular freelancers are, in the industry, we would call them stringers, what we call your first string, second string, third string, which in theater, you kind of can start to pick up on what that means. So if you're first string, that means you might, if you're in New York, that means you might do Broadway. Second string, you're going to do off Broadway. Third string, you're going to do off Broadway, right? So, and it kind of works the same way on the regional level. So if we're looking across the field, even not just in New York, but in regional theater in different cities and stuff, who are the main first string critics for most papers as freelancers, right? You're still going to see it be mostly white men between the ages of 55 and 65. So there's certainly work to be done there. And it's such a terrible predicament because on the one hand, the people who are left are fighting for the papers to produce the criticism to begin with, right? Every time you get an arts and culture feature in a newspaper, you've won a battle. People should just know that, right? And then on top of that, you've got this urgent need for diversity in order for that content to be more relevant. So you've got those two things doing this at all times. And so it is really challenging. And so the demands of VCU white American theater are very valid, but the uphill battle in the industry is steep. And one of the things that artists can do and that artistic producers can do is your advertising dollars and your letters to the editor go a whole lot further in talking about what you value. Readers writing letters to the editor, talking about what type of content they want to see more of, goes a whole lot further than any story I could possibly pitch. Because the way that metrics work in newsrooms now, people are having conversations, even at, places you would be shocked. And this is in magazines and newspapers about, okay, when so-and-so writes a story, we usually get this many shares. So we're going to let them write more. So it's not necessarily that they're the best writer. I mean, it's like the Instagramification of reporting. So it's like those types of conversations are being had. So people need to know that, like, that's what, when we talk about diversifying the field of theater criticism, that is what we're up against, is not only a flawed business model, but also an industry that is still, much like theater, very nepotistic. Is that a word? Oh my God, I don't think it is. Nepotism.
No, it is. Yeah, for sure. It sounds like it's the right one.
And where it's very hard for new voices to break in. And then you layer on top of that, when we talk about women, people of color, non-binary folks tend to be economically at risk a lot more. And so that breaking in period, we talk about it a lot of time as like pressure to perform immediately. So it's like, this is not a field where you can necessarily make a full-time living doing it. Like, I don't make a full-time living as a theater critic. I work in higher education. So, it's a hard sell to say, okay, somebody who has, lived on the fringes and poured everything into you and somehow miraculously gotten you through college is now going to wait for you to do this thing that has no guarantee of a viable salary. It's a hard sell, especially in communities of color and especially in immigrant communities, right? Where you've got parents who have given everything and they don't have anything left to give. They need that kid to get out of that house at 18 or at 22 and go to work. So I think it's important to recognize that, everybody has different realities. And those can be challenges. The same challenges that are a challenge to career in art are also challenges to careers in arts criticism. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yes. So I want to give our viewers then an action item, like a to-do, which is go out and engage with some theater criticism. And you said to write like letters to the editor, letters to most publications have many editors.
Right.
So are they going
Write them all.
to the top editor in chief? Let's talk about it. Or is it more useful to go to the arts and culture editor directly? Or is it straight to the top?
I would say do both. So writing to, if a publication has an arts and culture editor or a features editor might be another name that it's called, writing to that editor is really important. Also, managing editors are actually good people to talk to, because an editor-in-chief is usually really, really busy, but a managing editor is kind of like the difference between an artistic director and a managing director, right? In a theater, the artistic director is like, somewhere in the clouds, and the managing editor is doing the day-to-day work on the ground. So it's kind of a similar thing when you're talking about most magazines and newspapers. So writing to the managing editor and to the section editor is going to get you a lot further.
Amazing. Everyone go do that.
I just wanted to chime in really quickly and firstly say the chat is just filled with love and affirmation. But we do have a question from Cindy Brown, who is actually our first Vixens UnLearning guest, who's here watching and supporting. But she is asking, do you think the critics chosen are based on who they think the audience will be? So for Broadway, mostly being vanilla middle-aged audiences. Is there any sort of connect?
That factors into it for sure. Not even necessarily who they think the audience will be, but who they think the audience will respect. And that's a whole nother issue, right? Because what are we saying about the opinions of women, non-binary folks, people of color, if we have established that like the white male voice is the only authority that can, talk about art, when, it's, we've all had similar educations and sat in a lot of the same rooms. So, and it happens at every level. I will say in part of my work with the American Theater Critics Association, when we started the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee in spring of 2018, one of our first tasks was convincing publicists that women critics and critics of color should be able to get press tickets. And that's an ongoing battle.
That was
of having to make the case.
Yeah, that's
Have I shook the room? I didn't mean to silence the room.
No, I think it's important to like really understand when you say it's a steep uphill climb, the idea that a non-cis white male critic can't even get a comp to show up to watch the show and potentially review it. That's not even the climb of the mountain. That's like getting the equipment. Can I have a backpack to go? I have a mountain to climb. That is, I'm very happy that you're out there doing that work.
Yeah, that is a heinous access barrier. Thank you for shedding light on that, because I had no idea.
Yeah, heinous access barrier. And to answer more directly the viewer question, in regional theater and in New York, 70% of theater audiences are women. In communities of color, that number gets even a little higher. I think the research most recently said 74% of Black women are make up the theater going audience in the Black community. So when we're talking about whether the critic reflects the audience, in theory, most critics should be women. So that's just, a little tidbit there. And if people want to know, like, kind of where these stats and things come from, they can look at the Lilly Awards, keeps track of these things. HowlRound keeps track of these things. The American Theater Critics Association, we do our own kind of independent surveys and things like that to keep track of these things. And so, there are a number of organizations that are keeping track of these numbers, as well as independent groups. There's a group called Theater Folks of Color that keeps track of these things. So it's available information that's out there.
Wonderful. Not for the situation, but that the information is getting out there, and that seems like it shouldn't even be like, it seems like it's step one when it should just be like a fact of the land. But that idea that you can't solve a problem until you know that a problem exists. So let's shine a big bright spotlight on that problem. Let's think about happier things slightly. And talk a little bit about the theater that is being produced now, including your own work that it went up. I had a question about pandemic theater, and because we've been producing our own little versions of our shows, which are extremely physical shows built around us sword fighting. So picking it up off of the stage and moving it to this medium has been a real challenge. There's been a lot of puppet work and a lot of like, I'll take this butter knife and stab it at my computer camera and we're going to count it as a fight. I think it's been working so far. But you who have just produced a theater series online, have you, how was that process for you? And have you been seeing any other pandemic theater? And what should people be keeping in mind as we both produce and engage with theater in this new world, in this new medium?
How was it? It was grueling, but very rewarding. So I will say, like, a lot of people look at critics and go like, oh, these are people who just wanted to be artists and failed. Absolutely not. Like, I never, oh my God. I never. Oh, creating art is painful. So anyway, I have a deep appreciation for art. And that's another myth I'll debunk too. If you ever want to hear people gush about art, talk to a group of critics, honestly. Like, most of us are like art lovers, like to our heart, and the art we love. I was on a meeting not too long ago, yesterday, I think, where like it literally started with critics like singing In the Heights. Like it was like it was just like, what are you all doing? Like, we have a meeting to run, but they were just all like 96,000. So that's something to note. But I will say about producing pandemic theater. So the project that I produced was called Interface, an evening of new virtual plays. And the way that came about is that Fulton County, which is the county that Atlanta is in, had this thing called the Creative Entrepreneurship Virtual Arts Initiative, where they were giving out grants of up to $10,000 for projects that would allow people to engage with the arts virtually, since most of the theaters and art galleries and ballet and all of that had just been kind of canceled for the year. So, you know, living in Atlanta, anybody who lives in Atlanta will tell you spend an incredible amount of time in your car stuck on 285. And so I was in the car one day, and I just kind of had this idea because I noticed a lot of theaters were going to either doing like podcasting or putting up recorded performances, or they were doing like stage readings. And I was like, you know, what if somebody tried doing something in a virtual space that actually incorporated the technology instead of seeming like they were putting up something that was supposed to be analog in a digital world? And so that's how the idea for Interface initially came about. And I contacted my friend Bridget Burton, who's a phenomenal theater producer. And I said, I have this crazy idea, you know, and I think you can help me execute it. And she said, well, Fulton County has this grant. We've got 72 hours to turn in the application. And so we did it, and we got almost 10 grand. And so, like a bunch of insane people, what we decided to do is commission local playwrights, 6 local playwrights, to write original 15 to 20 minute long plays that incorporated technology and kind of reflected on how our relationship with technology has evolved over the last 20 years. So we started in the year 2000 on an AOL chat, and then we end in the future in 2023, where people are still like sitting across from each other in cafes and bubbles, and QR codes are talking, you know, at them. So that was kind of the journey we took the audience on. And so it was 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2020. And then I wrote the last play, which was called Long Time No See. It was set in 2023. So we kind of messed up the timeline with that one. So each play, was about something different. We gave them a premise and a year, and we said, right. We spent like 48 hours workshopping them. We gave them a month to write. No, 3 weeks. We gave them 3 weeks to write. We spent 48 hours workshopping the scripts one weekend in October. And then we held auditions, hired directors, designers, all this stuff, and had a 3.5 week rehearsal period. And we went up last weekend and we did 3 nights, and we reached, each night we had about 120 people viewing live. And then with the videos, we ended up being able to reach even more people. I think with the video reach, we got about 1,000 people over the course of the weekend. And we made it an event because we were what makes theater is that you feel like you're having a communal experience with somebody else. And the thing that we did differently, again, more insanity, is that we went live. So we did the whole rehearsal, audition, production process was done online. And everybody was literally performing at home. So we had 22 people on their computers all over the city of Atlanta, going live on YouTube and Facebook 3 nights in a row. If you ever want to see how bad your nerves can get, have a full company going live 3 nights in a row and hoping that it works. So how do I feel about producing art? It's awful. But rewarding.
So rewarding.
So rewarding.
Did it come off without a hitch?
We told people that the glitches were a part of the show. So to the audience, it came off with no, but honestly, Sunday, we didn't have not a single glitch. Saturday, we only had one, which is where a YouTube video that was supposed to play, the audio was messed up, but the actor who was emoted so well that people got the point of it. And then Friday, we had a sound glitch in one show. So actually, the biggest challenge was sound. And that's because a lot of these mediums, we use StreamYard to push out, are not necessarily equipped for sound streaming through video.
We are very
I was going to say, I'm just preaching to the choir. They're not equipped for sound streaming through video in a live format. They do a lot better with pre-recorded things. So, all kinds of skills we're developing in quarantine. I've learned how to master baking chicken thighs. And producing virtual theater.
Those are the only 2 skills you really need in life, right?
I think so.
And virtual theater.
And I did recently buy a cactus. So it is very small. If I kill it, I should be ashamed. It is this big.
I'm not gonna lie to you, Calundra. I have killed every cactus I've ever owned. My green plants, if it's a succulent, it has no hope of survival in my home. But if you are like a leafy green plant, I know how to take care of. So I wish you the best of luck.
I'm so nervous about this, you all. Literally send prayers my way. I will feel eternally guilty if I kill this cactus. Because it's a cactus. So anyway, we've deviated. I'm so sorry.
Okay. The beauty of conversation. Dana.
If I may hop in, we do have another question. I do want to circle back to it because I think it's very important. Also, you have cracked up Paige Jonesky.
Oh, hi, Paige.
And I figured we should call her out. But one of the questions that I think you would have more insight than any of us will, but someone wanted to know if there is a role that members of AEA can take up to help critics outside of the like standard norm become more sought after and brought in as a part of our theatrical makeup.
That's such a good question. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I think one is that AEA has the ear of the producers and the directors and the casting directors. And that is extremely influential because often, especially in the regional theater, those folks are managing essentially who's able to get in at their theaters. And so there's a few things that they can do. One is, again, having the ears of those artistic directors, those managing directors, those casting directors, and being able to say like, hey, to their publicity team or their PR contractors, you know, we want to see more diverse journalists and influencers in our audiences. And artistic directors, AEA, who is working with those equity houses, has the ability to say, hey, you need to have your performers going in front of more diverse audiences and more diverse critics in that regard, because that a diverse critic is going to bring in a more diverse audience. Our readership is different, right? So that's one is going to lead to the other. The other thing that AEA members can certainly do is like when we talk about talkbacks and pre-show discussions and other programming that theaters may have around the show, who's being asked to facilitate those conversations? Who's being asked to moderate? Who's being asked to host those kind of audience experience type things? That's a way where, you know, as AEA, you can say, hey, like, you know, bring in, as an AEA member, you can say, hey, how about this person, right? Bringing up people's names in rooms is so important. And I think another thing that AEA can do, perhaps, I don't know, is, I don't know. I mean, AEA, I understand right now is going through a lot, as is the industry. But I think one of the things that AEA could potentially do is on the regional level, because, you know, there are different, I'm thinking in film terms now, it's not the local, but you get what I'm saying, like the chapter or whatever. Being able to have educational programming that for member theaters and for individual members that bridges that gap and gets people talking to each other. And that's not out of the question by any means. So I think those are some things, just pulling things off the top of my head.
Amazing. Yes. Let's all talk to editors at newspapers, talk to your equity reps, talk to the theaters who are the folks who are making those decisions about what gets put in front of their audiences and how. Mm-hmm. I love knowing that that there are action steps that those of us who aren't in those positions of power at a producing organization could take to at least make our voices heard. I think that's fantastic. And
I will say, like, not to cut you off, but I will say, like, it's the thing is that even when we think about, so I conduct in non-pandemic times, I facilitate theater criticism workshops for various equity theaters, apprentice and intern companies. And these are paid, you know, teaching artist type positions. And it wasn't until I emailed these artistic directors and education directors and said, hey, I do this, that I was able to get in to do it. And some theaters use me, some of them don't in Atlanta. But it's one of those things where people sometimes just don't know that the opportunity even exists. So put the opportunity out there and you never know who will come. Because, if they're paying somebody $600 to come in and teach a workshop to an apprentice company, that's an opportunity for someone who normally wouldn't have it to be able to come in and showcase their expertise and build relationships. And then based on the work I did the first year, which was a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that I did the first workshop, the students really liked me. And so the theater called me back. And so it starts to build a reputation for you that you can carry with you. And that's really important for theater critics in general to be able to diversify themselves, because again, we're not getting bylines, like that. And also they just don't pay well. But also, for critics from underrepresented groups, if you're only getting an assignment from, the daily paper in your town once or twice a month in a normal theater season, then what those theaters can offer you makes a huge difference, because most daily papers are only pay between like $100 and $200 for a review. So when you ask me, why I write for Food and Wine,
big name mag.
But also I really love writing for Food and Wine. It's a lot of fun, and the editorial staff is actually really, really great.
Incredible.
Can I throw in a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Because Calundra, you're so knowledgeable about the field and specifically about your place as a critic in the field. I am curious, and who knows if there are people out there today listening or people who will watch this video later, but who want to be critics, who see that path as something that they are excited about, especially people from marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. Hearing those numbers is scary. Like, hearing the realities of it is really scary. And you as a teacher, like, what do you say to that kind of like, young person or older person who's like, I would love to write about the theater, and this looks like a very scary entrance. What do you offer, to those folks?
So I say that if you want to do it, do it. What I've noticed, particularly for people like between the ages of like 17 and like 25, is that there's this fear of kind of one of the earlier questions you all asked me, which was about, oh my God, what if somebody doesn't like something I wrote and they like call me out on Twitter, or they say something about me on Facebook or Instagram, or like, they drag my name through the mud. Like, what do I do? And that's actually more so their fear than their ability to write well about theater, which is astounding to me. I don't care.
Scary place.
I don't care what a stranger I've never met has to say about me. You know what I mean? They can say anything they want about what I've written and whether they agree or not, but about me personally, please. So I don't care at all. I always say to people, say it to my face. I don't care. And most of the time also, when people will send you like these little huffy emails, when you reply, they totally change their tone. It's like they think they're emailing into a void, and then you respond and they're like, oh my God, I'm talking to a person. It's the same thing with the Twitter thugs. You know what I mean? It's like they'll at you and say all the things, and then you respond, they change their tone. You know what I mean? It's because they're not talking into a void. They're talking to a human being. And I think in criticism and in life, it is always important to remember that you're talking to and about humans. And you have to be respectful. And so when it comes to people who want to enter the field, what I say is just start going to shows and doing it. Don't hesitate. Don't, willow and wallow about it, because the more you think about it, the less inclined you are to do it. I mean, it's the same thing with performing. Get out there on stage and And you're gonna be bad at it before you're good at it. It's like anything else. But the wonderful thing about the wasteland that is the internet is that all of your bad stuff will get so deeply buried in search engines that no one will be able to find it. So then they'll only be able to find your good stuff. So it really just works out. So I would say anybody who's young and interested in going into theater criticism, start a blog. Start going to shows and start writing. If you're in high school and your high school's doing theater, start writing about your high school shows. You're in college, same thing. And just figuring out what it is you have to say, because even though a lot of young people are afraid of the response to what they have to say, the actual challenge of being a critic and that it takes so long to develop is your voice. I don't feel like I really started to settle into my voice until I was like 27. And I'm still developing my voice as far as I'm concerned. You know, I feel like I'm still figuring out like, okay, am I the person who says that? Do I want to go there? Because there are lots of moments that you're going to be faced with when you're writing, as I say, in the public, for the public, that you're like, okay, if I say this thing, does it make me that critic, and does it take away the other points I'm trying to make, and is that consistent with my voice? Am I willing to just risk it anyway? The defining your voice piece is the work of it. Forget the haters. Start a blog, find your voice. That's my advice.
That's phenomenal advice. I love that. So write to your editors, be in conversation with your local theaters, and find your voice.
Find your
Phenomenal. Voice. Calundra, thank you so much. This was a wonderful, fascinating conversation. I want to send everybody not only to do those specific things, those action items, but also go watch Interface on YouTube. We put up a link in the chat. You can check out the American Theater Critics Association as well. And go follow Calundra on all social media. She posts pictures that don't have to do with the text in a brilliant move to make you actually read things. I love it. It's amazing. Thank you to the audience for joining us tonight, for your questions, for your comments in the chat. This is the final night of this season, of Unlearning. And we hope that you've enjoyed these conversations as much as we have. So thank you all our Vixens for being here tonight. And another thank you to Calundra.
Thank you all so much. I really, really, really appreciate you all for sharing the platform and opening up the space to have this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Us too. And I hope the audience did as well. So thanks everyone, and have a great night. We'll see you later.